All right, I think we will go ahead and get started. We have all four presenters here. We have an hour, so 15 minutes per presenter, and then if we're over a little bit, it should be okay, but I'm trying to keep everybody on time because other people want to come and see one of the talks, and so if we get offset from the 15 minutes, too much is a problem. So the first talk, you can read the title. I don't have to read it for you, but the presenters are Roshan and Rohith here. If you can tell, they're related. Very closely related, like identical twin brothers. But go ahead, guys. Why don't you go ahead?
Okay, this talk gets into how we perceive room sizes based on sound and vision. My name is Roshan, and that's Rohith, and we'll be here presenting this talk because our authors couldn't make it. But let's get right into it. We often judge the sizes of the rooms that we inhabit. Look around this room. How large do you think it is? Now, on a fundamental level, the perception of a room size may be linked to how we perceive distances. So we could perceive distances egocentrically, like how far the walls are away from us, and exocentrically, or in terms of how far walls are from each other. And we use this information in gauging how large a space may be. Traditionally, researchers have employed different means to measure users' perception of room size, including verbal reports where they get quantitative estimates of the different dimensions of the room, or through relative comparisons where you can imagine somebody saying, this office is twice the size of my old office. Or in interior decor settings, you could think of somebody saying, using spaciousness ratings where they adjust the spaciousness of a room on a linear scale. Recently, Gagnon and colleagues introduced what they call room recreation, which is a method to obtain a quantitative estimate of a room size. So to do this, users could adjust the shapes or the walls of the room, reflecting how large they perceive the space to be. Now, we most often use visual information to perceive the size of a room, but other information like the sounds bouncing off the walls and reflecting off the walls coming into our ears may also specify the size of the room. And this is interesting and important, or studying this is important from an accessibility perspective, because think about individuals that may have impaired vision, for instance. We know from prior research that orally perceived distances tend to be underestimated both in the real world and in virtual reality, and that calibration is a mechanism that allows us to account for this perceptual inaccuracy, wherein users are provided feedback and are made to take corrective actions in order to improve their accuracy. So if I were to take shots on this target, only to find out that all my shots veer off to the right, I can simply calibrate by now aiming to the left and then shooting. And research suggests that one's auditory perception of distance can also be calibrated. Now, from a sensory modality perspective, it is likely to be the case that our visual perception of a room size is more accurate than our perceiving the room size solely based on audition. So consider a hypothetical where we're all in this room, which technically isn't a hypothetical, and we're asked to perceive the size of this room and judge how large it is. I would bet that we would be more accurate if we can see the room rather than if the rooms were off, the lights were off and we are perceiving the size of the room. It's because we're more familiar with perceiving rooms based on vision rather than solely based on audition. So with all of this in mind, we were interested in ascertaining if and how visual and auditory perception of a room size can be calibrated. And to do this, we conceptualized a task, specifically a room size estimation task, wherein users would estimate the size of a room for a number of trials, and they would use Gagnon et al.'s room recreation method to gauge how large this room size was. And we employed a pre-test calibration post-test approach, wherein in the calibration phase, users were provided feedback of how large the room actually was, giving them the perceptual accuracy of how accurate they were, and they were provided this feedback and were made to take corrective actions in order to improve their accuracy, so we could then test the effects of calibration from pre to post-test. So what did this look like? So in one condition, users were actually in a dark room. They couldn't see the walls of the room, and they could only see a speaker, and they could hear the sound emanating from the speaker. And the sound was actually modeled to taking into consideration where the actual walls were. So once they were ready to report how large they felt it was. They would use the controller, after which a room was spawned. They would adjust the size of the room until they felt it accurately represented how large they perceived it to be. And then we went to the feedback stage where they were provided feedback where the actual room's walls were red and the floors were also red. And in order for them to be able to see this, their estimate walls were also turned transparent. And then following this, they would take corrective action where they would adjust the size of their estimate to the actual room size. And then feedback was provided by that visually, thus completing the trial. So we employed a 2x2 by 3x5 multifactorial design, manipulating the sensory modality as a between subjects factor across two conditions where they perceive the size of the room visually or orally, where, as we just explained before, and in the visual condition, they were shown the room size. They were shown the room's walls, actually. We gathered measures of their room size through both room recreation and through verbal reports in terms of how many arm spans they felt the room was wide. And again, we employed a three-phased approach, pre-test, calibration, post-test, where the calibration phase had feedback and they would take corrective actions for their estimates. We tested this for 5 different room sizes. Each of the rooms were all square-shaped, and the height of the room was constant at 3 meters, and it was ensured that in the calibration phase, the room sizes tested were different from the pre- and post-test phases to prevent any learning effects. This is what the conditions look like, or a condition looked like, and I'll pass it on to my brother.
So they're hearing the sound here, and then once they're ready, they first provide their verbal reports of how large the room is in terms of their arm spans, and then they use the controller to adjust the size of the room until it accurately matches their perception. And this is the calibration trial, so we'll actually show you what feedback was like. And then when they underestimate, they can actually see how off they were, and until they moved it onto the actual wall's positions, they would keep getting this feedback. And you saw what overestimation and underestimation looked like. And they did the same task in the visual condition, except that they saw the walls instead of listening to sound and having to make those judgments based on vision as opposed to audition. We gathered estimates of room size using room recreation, which is Gagnon's method from 2020 or 2021, and verbal reports. And then we used this to compute signed error scores, which can tell us if they overestimated or underestimated the room's size. Then we also looked at how long participants required with the stimulus before they were ready to make a judgment. A total of 42 participants were recruited for the study, 20 in the auditory condition and 22 in the visual condition. 20 of our participants identified as female and the rest male. Their mean age was about 23 years old. After consenting to participate in the study, users would fill up a demographics questionnaire which probed into all sorts of aspects regarding their ability to hear. They also took a hearing test to ensure normal hearing, following which they were briefed about the experiment. Their arm spans were then measured, and then we tailored the HRTF to each participant based on their anthropometric parameters, following which they performed a set of practice trials on room sizes that were different from the actual tested trials. And then they performed the task across the 3 phases, pre-test, calibration, and post-test, following which they answered a battery of questionnaires, one of which included the NASA TLX. They then engaged in semi-structured interviews, and then this marked the end of the session where they were compensated and thanked for their participation. We used multiple regression to analyze our data, predicting perceived size with actual size, condition, phase, and reporting methods as predictors, including their interactions. And this was analyzed in terms of the room's length, given that we actually employed a square room, which always had a height of 3 meters. And we analyzed the signed error scores and the amount of time required of the stimulus using a mixed model ANOVAs. What did we find? Well, we found a significant regression equation predicting perceived size, and when we look at room recreation, or this method of gathering room size estimates with oral perception, we found what you see on the picture here. Now, how to interpret this is to first look at the vertical judgment line, which represents 100% perceptual accuracy. In other words, here's where the perceived room size equals exactly the actual room size, so 100% accuracy. So a line closer to the vertical means that you're more accurate, and a line more deviant means you're less accurate. So notice the pre- and post-test lines. The pre-test line, though inaccurate slightly, is closer to the vertical than the post-test line, suggesting improvement in accuracy after undergoing a calibration phase. So oral perception of room size, though inaccurate, can be calibrated using the method that we just showed you. What about visual perception? As expected, better than oral perception, so we could not find that opportunity to calibrate because they're pretty good to begin with. But nonetheless, what we're finding is room recreation can reliably measure both visual perceptions of room size as well as oral perceptions, which is pretty cool. What about verbal reports? Not so great. We found that verbal reports are not as good as room recreation, and they tend to be inaccurate. But what's interesting over here is auditory perceptions of room size allowed for some degree of improvement with calibration employed through this method of room recreation. So we were able to show that calibration can transfer to a different measure even though it's provided using room recreation. But they can only get to a certain level of accuracy. There's a point of saturation that's reached there. But some degree of improvement can even be seen in the verbal reports when you offer feedback in a different type, which is pretty cool again. Looking at this in a different way, we see again, verbal reports are inaccurate. And what's more is if you focus on the auditory condition alone, you see generally people tend to underestimate the perceived sizes of rooms just like they do distance. So that's also something that we're learning from here. But calibration can address the degree of underestimation. Again, cool. So we're all for calibration. What did we find with respect to the amount of time participants required with the stimulus? As the phases went on, they got faster, or not faster, I should say, but rather they required less time with the stimulus. But what's cool is they were able to improve their accuracy in perceiving room sizes orally, and they took less time with the stimulus to become that accurate. So they're both getting better at performing the task, and they're requiring less task to get that better. So what does this all mean? Compared to verbal reports, room recreation created by Gagnon and Janine over there appears to be more reliable method to measure perceived sizes of rooms, both visually as well as orally. Perceiving a room's size based on sound, though inaccurate, can be improved through calibration. And what's more is calibrative feedback provided on estimates obtained using one measure can actually transfer over to judgments made using other measures. So a question was asked yesterday about can calibration from one type of feedback transfer over to others, and the answer over here is we can. Thanks.
Questions? I think we have time for one, maybe two.
Great presentation. Love
Thanks.
that. The quick question, do you think the material or the walls of and would have impacted, and then of course that kind of made their estimation off in the beginning and calibration helped with that? And do you think if they're put into different rooms, even after calibration, the estimation would be off because the materials are different?
Great question. This was something that we discussed with our collaborators in Taiwan as well. The audio stimulus that participants heard was modeled to take into account the properties of the room as well. Not only the positions of the walls, but also the material textures and the geometry of the walls, including every single bump is what I hear from our collaborators. So the answer to your question would be, regardless of the materialistic properties, calibration still would seem to work, would be my hunch, because the feedback plus corrective action is an opportunity for people to improve their perceptual judgments in performing such a task. So I think room recreation over here is a good way of measuring room size perception, and calibration, which we're showing, can also help improve oral perceptions of room size regardless of the properties of the materials applied on the walls.
I would think that if once you have someone calibrated and you put them in the same size room but with different materials, then the estimation would be off. So you would have to do the calibration again for the different room.
100%. You need feedback that's appropriate to the stimulus. So if the stimulus involves different geometries or different materials on the wall, you're going to need to recalibrate based on the feedback that's applicable to that wall.
And when you say materials, we're assuming that you mean like whether it's concrete or wooden and not like textural materials like color or something. But that would also specify the size of the room, and objects might also specify the size of the room, but we didn't test having objects in the room or things of the sort.
So who's up next? You're up next, right? Okay, why don't you go ahead and start working your way up. Yeah, so very nice, guys. Give another round of applause.
Just need HDMI.
I have questions, but I'll catch you later. All right, now we have Aditya Raikwar, who's going to be talking about, you'll see the title, I can read it to you, Ping, Your Food is Ready, Comparing Different Notification Techniques in 3D AR Cooking Environment. And so it's about how do you, like visual and oral notifications of something happening, but I'll let him explain that to you. So Aditya, welcome, please, go ahead.
Thanks. Hi, my name is Aditya. I'm here to present, as you said, Ping, Your Food is Ready, comparing different world-fixed notification techniques in 3D AR cooking environment. So the idea about this research is mainly based on, in the future, I'm hoping and expecting that everyone would have some form of AR glasses, and not the magically bulky ones, but rather how you wear any glasses. And in that scenarios, displaying information is critical, especially if you're walking down the road, there are poles or people, you don't want to bump into them. So notifications which display information in a pop-up format, you can't really have them pop up right in front of the face, right? And so where to display this information? Now, AR provides some ability to scan the 3D space, and we can utilize those 3D environments to actually map and display stuff linked to the world rather than as a person. Of course, you can have notifications floating right in front of you or attached to your body, but then we can utilize the 3D environment to display the same information. And so there have been some research using VR where you don't want to take them out of the world. So if it's a medieval setting, you can just have a soldier on a horse coming in, opening up a scroll and reading your notification, something like that. And so kind of pairing off of it, I designed a few of different types of notification for augmented reality. Okay. So we had two independent variables, visual notifications and audio notifications. The visual notifications were of two types. One was on the object, which we'll see in a little bit, and on the dock. And the audio notification was a bubble popping sound. This was selected just to kind of have like a subtle sound, but still prompt user, so that it's not irritating like a horn. Because the idea of this is in a restaurant, you don't, unless something is on fire, you don't want to just have sirens going on. And the hardware used is, of course, HoloLens 2. Now, 26 participants took part in the study, 13 male, 13 female, age from 23 to 70. And we did check for if they had any prior experience in restaurant work, and 47.6% said they have worked in some capacity, either as a cook or waiter or something else. Spoiler alert, didn't matter. It was everything the same. Right. So I used an open source via AR environment called Artisan Bistro, which had all the cooking scenario already implemented. And so you can see it used hand tracking, and you can build, for example, burgers. So, and there were instructions, you can turn them on and off. So they had some time to experience how to make the food in that scenario. And then I'll let you watch this a little bit. You get the gist. So using that, a few of the notifications that I designed was notification on objects, where the notifications were displayed right above the object that prompted the notification. So in this case, if you put the patty on the grill, it popped up right above the object, and if you can hear the sound, it made that bubble popping sound. It would be much clearer in the audio notifications. The second type is notification on dock, where there's similar to when you swipe down on your phone, You have all the notification in one place. You have all the notification on this dock. And the positioning of the dock can be set wherever you want. But we did notice that most of the participants did not move the dock at all. They kept it in front of the customers. Yeah. Then the third one is, of course, audio notifications. That was the bubble popping sound that you heard. And this was for every time there's a new notification that pops up, they would hear this sound if the condition asked for it. So the way experiment worked was when the participant came in, they were, of course, briefed about everything. They had to sign the consent form and all that, the legal stuff, I guess. And then when they started the experiment, there were total 6 conditions. Among them, randomly, one of the conditions was assigned. And each condition had 6 customers that they had to serve. Now, these 6 customers would wait for 2 minutes each, and then they would get pissed off and leave if you don't serve them. And each of them would request for one single type of food item, so either burger, pizza, or a coffee. And once they are done with all 6 conditions, they were asked to report some surveys and interviews and things like that. So first, looking at the results, we can see that if we only consider visual-only notification, that is, no audio was involved, the notifications, there was no difference in the performance. Well, what do I mean by performance? In this case, how many customers were they able to serve? So out of 6, if you look at the numbers there, 4.79 means on average 4.79 customers were served out of 6. Right. Looking at the significant ones, the only ones that were significant was notification on object with sound versus notification on dock with sound and with no visual notification, just audio. Right. And so that shows us that notification on object with sound was the best performing one. And so that's 1 point for that. Looking at how quickly they were able to notice the notification. Now, when I say notice the notification, I had a random number that would pop up right above the notification, ranging from 0 to 15, and they had to read out that number as soon as they saw the notification. And that told me that they actually looked at the notification, and they had a visual audio confirmation. Looking at that, the reaction time was much faster when audio was involved. Of course, that makes sense because you're working on something and you have some notification behind you. Audio, of course, helps you to notice that there's a new notification, right? The only thing is because they had to read out the number, they had to actually turn around and read it out rather than just hear the sound. So this number that you see, take into account that the small time they had to turn around. Yeah. And in this one, although there was no significant difference between notification on object with sound and notification on dock with sound, but by purely looking at the numbers, notification on object with sound was the best one. So another point for that. Finally, oh, my bad. The first one was number of notifications called. So how many they notice. The second one is reaction time. In this one, how quickly they noticed it, and there was no significant difference. Right. Now looking at the PSSUQ scores, the notification on object with sound, again, performed the best, was the most preferred one. Another point for that. And when we looked at NASA TLX scores between if they have worked in a restaurant or not, we wanted to check if the people who have some prior experience of restaurant work, do they feel the same amount of workload, both mentally or physically? But there was no significant difference with that. So looking at some of the limitations of the study, in a normal chaotic restaurant scenarios, in a kitchen, it would be more audio noise, right? So we didn't account for that in this study, so that was missing. In the future studies, that would be preferable. So in that case, maybe the audio notification might not be as significantly better. And the second one was the user had to call out the the notification number, the randomly generated number, verbally, and so add in a couple of milliseconds of response time of the examiner to press the button after registering whatever the number the participant said. We try to minimize this noise for the second one by having the input the exact number, so that if the examiner by mistake clicked some random thing and stuff like that, or at the wrong time, that won't happen. But still, we had to consider that there's still some discrepancy. Now, what do we know from this? We know that if you are designing any type of notification, make sure you have both visual and audio, audio being the best one, but pure audio, of course, did not perform completely better than visual only. So you need both of them. Yeah. Especially if you want to give some type of information that can't be supplied with audio. And of course, having the notification above the object rather than in the field of view or in one single position, it is preferred to have it in context. So don't have all the sounds playing in the same position. Have it separated so that that itself gives you some type of information like location of the notification. Finally, the future work, personalized notifications. We want to check if some users preferred certain type of notification, if they had an ability to control different types of notification. For example, what station should give the notification. For in this case, if there's a new customer, there was a notification. If the level of cooking gave a notification, and every time the coffee was made, gave a notification. But if they don't care about when a new customer comes in or when the coffee is brewed enough, then they can turn it off. Does that increase their likeness of the system? Right? And then, of course, instead of using audio notification, can we have haptic feedback to replace that in maybe a noisy environment? And so that would be interesting to see. Yeah. That's all. Do you have any questions?
All right, I have a quick one.
Yeah.
You were talking about accounting for time, like after they spoke, and then the researcher had to hit a button or something like that.
Yeah.
That amount of time, just roughly, I can't quite, I don't have a good sense for how big that is relative to the time scales of everything else you're measuring. How sensitive were the measures you were making to that small thing?
So, as I said, each customer stayed there for 2 minutes, and each cooking scenarios, like going from uncooked to cooked, that was like 10 seconds. And so, if you had to cook a single food, it would, in and all, assembling and serving the customer, it would take about a minute to account for everything. In 1 minute, it would take the examiner like 10 or 20 milliseconds to input that. So,
So 20 milliseconds out of 60 seconds,
Yeah.
kind of roughly. Okay, all right. Thanks. Yeah, quick question.
Hi, David from CMU. Very cool presentation. I was wondering if you think your results would change. So currently you use a queued kind of paradigm, right? Participants were expecting and knowing that notifications are going to happen. Do you think your results would change if participants would be more surprised, or if this were kind of less frequent notifications, if this would influence some of your results on response time or general user experience?
well, I would say in normal any scenario, when you're surprised by something, you need to understand what type of action you would take based on that surprise, right? And so, of course, that would delay whatever the response time would be to do that. I would also think that if they don't know what the notification signifies, they might just ignore that as simple noise, and the pizza would be burning in the oven at that point. So yeah, it would affect a lot, yeah. So in the briefing, before the experiment started, I did show them the video of exactly what the notification signifies. And of course, that helped them to understand what's going on. But given that there were instances where there was no notification, it was still decent performance. I would think telling them just improve them, but if you don't tell them what it is, it would be similar to what no notification would give.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I was going to say we could keep going, but it's your students' time we're taking. So maybe let's go ahead and swap. Let's give thank you again. So I'll see if I get this right. Muzhe? Yeah. Thank you. Woo. He's going to be talking about New Ears, an exploratory study of audio interaction techniques for performing search in a virtual reality environment. So it has to do with search tasks and audio through an audio interface. So, and he is a master's student at Carnegie Mellon. Looking for a PhD position maybe after this, but we'll see.
Yeah. Thank you so much for the detailed introduction. Hi everyone, I'm Muzhe. Today I'm really excited to present New Year, which is a collaboration with great collaborators, Cheng and David Lindlbauer, right there. So as an overview, we propose and evaluate 4 auditory interaction techniques which support search and navigation in virtuality by augmenting how users hear in environment exploration. So search and navigation refers to the process of traveling towards a specific goal by gathering and analyzing environmental cues. This task is critical in VR with applications ranging from searching for rewards in gaming. There's some glitch happening. We'll just watch the animation. Yeah, this task is kind of critical in VR with applications ranging from searching for rewards in gaming, for example, as well as navigating conversations in social VR. So efficient interaction techniques for search and navigation is essential for ensuring environmental exploration efficiency as well as the user experience. So to this end, previous research has largely focused on the visual aspects, including exploring various visualizations for navigation aids in virtual environments, drawing inspirations from real-life guidance systems like GPS, as well as prototyping experiences beyond our real-life capabilities, such as viewing multiple locations simultaneously through overlapping viewpoints. While the visual perception is central to our spatial awareness, it's not the only contributor. In fact, over-reliance on visual input alone can lead to issues like VR sickness, as noted in prior research. So complementing visual perception, the auditory perception also plays a crucial role in shaping our spatial awareness, especially in situations where targets are outside of field of view or in visual acuity areas. Well, however, to a lesser extent, prior work on audio-based method for search and navigation in VR has explored strategies such as music aid and sonification mapping. However, most of this research only focuses on replicating real-life sensory experiences without fully harnessing VR's potential to provide beyond real experiences. So our work addresses this gap by investigating what if we can extend auditory perception capabilities beyond those of the real world. In other words, we explore whether we can improve search and navigation performance and experience in VR by augmenting our hearing. To this end, we iteratively designed and developed 4 auditory interaction techniques, each with unique design rationale inspired by prior work. So now let me introduce you each one. The first technique is called audio teleportation. As the name suggests, the audio teleportation integrates auditory perception with teleportation, a common locomotion technique in VR that allows users to sort of point to a target location and instantaneously jump there. As a demonstration, in front of you is a ringing cell phone that is barely visible from the distance, where you can hear it. When the user activates teleportation, their auditory perception moves to the target location, represented by the virtual head positioned above the ground, aligned with the user's head. So by scanning the environment, user can quickly identify the location of the phone and travel towards it. We believe that this technique is particularly useful in scenarios that require frequent movement and processing of audio cues. The second technique is audio cone. When enabled, the audio cone projects a cone-shaped field from the controller, just like a torchlight, amplifying the volume of any sound source within its cone's range. User can adjust the cone's angle and sweep it around to precisely locate the sound sources. This technique is designed for scenarios where identifying the direction of the sound is critical. Next, we introduce ninja ears. So ninja ears were inspired by previous work on target selection, such as ninja cursors and ninja hands. This technique creates a grid of evenly distributed auditory perspectives, represented by virtual head again, oriented according to user's head. User can toggle between these perspectives with selection highlighted by the green bubble, allowing them to listen from different vantage points. This approach allows users to shift their auditory perspectives quickly among points of interest when exploring an environment. Lastly, we have the boom mic, and as the name suggests, this technique borrows from the concept of real-life boom mic, commonly used in film and audio production to capture target sound from a distance. This technique is then a boom pole with microphone overlaid with virtual head at the end of the pole. User can control the pole's length and orientation to listen from a specific point in an environment. The fixed orientation of the microphone makes it a versatile tool for local precise searches. I hope you get a general idea of it, and for more systematic discussions on these techniques, please see our paper. So to understand the effectiveness of these techniques in improving search and navigation performance, as well as their impact on users' subjective experience, we conducted an evaluation study with 25 participants who reported no visual or auditory impairment. The study compared the 4 interaction techniques we proposed against the baseline teleportation technique without any auditory augmentation. Participants were tasked with performing a search activity in a virtual office environment. In each condition, they were instructed to locate and collect 12 gems that emitted a continuous sound. To reflect the range of real-world search scenarios, the 12 gems were divided into 2 categories. The free floating gems above the ground with no occlusion around it, and occluded gems hidden behind objects like trash cans and plants. The locations where the gems were placed were randomly sampled from pre-configured locations as shown in the map. Here we present the result of the study in 2 parts. First, in terms of performance and behavior, the new ear interaction techniques significantly improve search and navigation efficiency. Compared to the teleportation baseline, all proposed techniques substantially reduce both the distance travel during gem search, with audio cone showing the largest reduction at 52%, as well as the average number of teleportation required, with ninja ears achieving the highest reduction at 68%. Regarding the completion time, the audio teleportation, audio cone, and ninja ear led to slightly faster average completion times, though the differences were not significant. Notably, the boom mic resulted in a significantly longer completion time, which we'll discuss in more detail later. In terms of subjective experience, participants generally found audio teleportation and audio cone to be more usable. Compared to the baseline teleportation, both techniques received a significantly higher usability score. As a breakdown, while all the proposed techniques were rated highly for their hedonic qualities, such as being interesting, inventive, and leading edge, the audio teleportation and audio cone were also valued for their pragmatic qualities, such as being supported and efficient to use. Correspondingly, participants ranked audio teleportation and audio cone significantly higher than the baseline teleportation. Although we measure factors such as presence and embodiment, neither show significant differences compared to the baseline. Similarly, our technique did not have an effect on experience of motion sickness. So what did we learn from this exploratory study? Our result demonstrated that the new ear interaction techniques significantly improved search and navigation efficiency. During the post-interview, many participants attributed poor performance in the baseline interpretation to a sense of uncertainty experience. So in situations where visual cues weren't readily available, the audio cues became really important for guiding navigation and thus require efficient collection strategies. Another key insight from participants was the importance of how well the auditory interaction techniques integrated with existing task flow and control mechanisms. Most participants praise audio interpretation for seamlessly merging audio cues with the interpretation process, while in contrast, the boom mic separated auditory serving from locomotion, making the process really unintuitive and cumbersome to manage, which thus led to increased completion time. Although the study focused on auditory alternative for scaffolding search and navigation, participants indicated that the visual feedback actually remained crucial. For example, the floating head indicator in the audio interpretation helped participants better understand the position and orientation of the audio perspective in the space. While on the other hand, the ninja ear selection mechanisms, which use a bubble selector, sometimes suffer from visibility issues, especially with occluded objects, leading to high uncertainty. This work represented an initial step towards improving search and navigation in virtual reality through use of auditory interaction techniques. Our current experiment was conducted in a controlled environment without any background noises, which may not reflect real-world conditions. Additionally, participants were instructed to complete the task as quickly as possible, rather than in a more flexible or natural manner. So future work should definitely consider introducing more complexity to the experiment, such as ambient noises, scenarios require spatial cognitive mapping, such as something like that. We also hope to expand the scope of our research by applying our proposed techniques to additional usage scenarios and applications. Participants identified several key areas worth exploring, such as gameplay, social VR, passive auditory environment experiences, and also accessibility in VR. So these domains represent diverse opportunities to further develop and refine our techniques, especially in contexts where traditional visual navigation method may fall short. In summary, we introduced 4 auditory interaction techniques that for search and navigation, each with different unique rationale and feature. Our evaluation study demonstrated that these techniques not only improve search efficiency, but also enhance the overall user experiences. And based on these findings, we'll offer insights for future auditory interaction design. And with that, we thank everyone for their attention, and now we're happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Wow, so many questions. Maybe Sab, let's try 2.
Very, very interesting work. Did you find that any of the auditory navigation techniques on teleportation improved spatial knowledge acquisition, spatial orientation?
Yeah, I think we discussed a little bit in kind of future work. On this study, we only focus on mainly the task performance, like searching for the gems as quickly as possible. We didn't ask participants to kind of memorize the environment, like different features. So definitely that's something worth exploring in future.
Yeah, potentially spatial localization of the targets would be very interesting.
That's a really good point.
Hi, great talk. I wanted to ask, when you say different interaction techniques, do you think it would differ in different tasks? Let's say if I put different techniques and interaction technique in a same task, would it have a difference? And the other question is like practical question, like when you say efficient to use, do you mean in terms of like efficient to design within the task, or it's something to do with resource?
Regarding the first question, yeah, we kind of designed the techniques for different use cases. For example, like I said, audio interpretation may be more efficient in scenarios where you want to do a lot of interpretation to like sort of navigate in the environment. And audio clone for more directional, guidance. Ninja Air, you already spawn in the air, so you can just quickly toggle. So yeah, I think they are suitable for different cases. I kind of forgot the second question. Can you say?
The second question is about when you say efficient to design, efficient technique, do you mean by designing it or about resource or something else?
I think we're specifically pointing to like efficiency in terms of searching for like targets. I think the other aspect you mentioned is pretty also interesting for example, like design. Yeah, definitely. I think maybe for future work.
Yes, I can be quick. And I also want to say, just as a program chair, this was one of the favorite papers that we all read. So we really enjoyed this paper. Yes, bravo. I'm doing work with visual accessibility, and so I know you said like the visual feedback is really important here. It's critical for kind of understanding. I'm wondering if you had people with low vision who still have some residual information, visual information about the environment. If you could choose just one to help them sort of navigate around a world, which would you pick?
I'll definitely go with audio interpretation. I think Participant mentioned that with audio interpretation, they can just close their eye and be able to complete the task, because the audio interpretation kind of just couples your locomotion with the perception. So yeah, but definitely there's probably other kind of aspects, design space to be explored beyond these techniques. So yeah, I think, yeah, that would be great. Thank you. Thanks.
And if you can't come to him, he can come to you through teleportation audio. It's like from Pittsburgh. He'll just. Adrielle Moraes, forgive me, Moraes, is going to be talking about, and so she is from TU Shannon. She's going to be talking about the impact of auditory and audiovisual distractors on task performance in a VR-based auditory attention task. As someone who had small children once, I could kind of imagine having those sorts of distractors, but go ahead, Adrielle.
All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Adrielle. I'm here to present my work entitled Impact of Auditory and Audiovisual Distractors on Task Performance in a VR-based Auditory Attention Task. And it's no secret for us, especially here at the end of this session, that audio will play an important role in creating an immersive and engaging experience, especially with the technologies such as spatial audio, where you can localize sounds in space. We were just giving a great talk where this was mentioned as well. So it is essential for navigating, interacting with the virtual environment. And this is not only for virtual environments, but also with the physical environment. So my work has a main core on auditory processing skills. Usually we are focused on visual ability, so how do we perceive the environment, how do we see the environment, but again, audio plays a crucial role, and especially I want to have a highlight on auditory processing, because we need to focus our attention to something. And we can do this by ignoring things that are surrounding us. For example, now I'm talking here to you, and there's also some noise in the background with like plates and something's going on out there, but you're able to ignore all of this and pay attention to what the presenters here are talking today. So this is one of the fundamental skills that we have. It's not only about perceiving the auditory information, it's about processing the information and understanding what's important to the user and what's not important to the user as well, okay? When we talk about the state of art in auditory processing abilities, the focus is on visual perception, but now I just want to bring our attention to auditory processing abilities as well. And usually what's used are classroom scenarios. So in those scenarios, they have the ability to focus on the speaker, which is the teacher in most of cases, and they ignore everything else. Like if there's other students talking, they can ignore. If there's any noise coming from outside of the room, they can ignore as well. And in those works, different characteristics of spatialized audio were explored. So I can just mention a few here. We can have spatialized and non-spatialized audio. We can also talk about different intensities for the audio stimulus, and also different position for the audio as well, okay? And also in terms of the task, we have pretty much two paradigms. So we can have an X paradigm-based exercise, which is the one that I have here on the left. So you do and take an action when you hear something or when you see something. So here just have one simple example. You press the button whenever you hear the word apple. So if the word apple is something that you hear or see, then you press the button. And you have, in contrast, no X paradigm-based exercises where you press the button if you don't hear anything or if you don't see anything. And in both tasks, you're gonna have distractors, and they will make this task much more challenging. Okay, so in terms of the research methodology for my study, I had 5 different phases, so it's pretty much similar to the other works here from today. I got consent and information from participants. They also went through a screening stage because I'm talking about perception, so we need to be sure that all participants will be able to perceive the auditory information. This was followed by a baseline step because I'm also collecting some physiological data from the user, such as skin response, gaze data, and performance data as well. And this was followed by tutorial and testing, which is a task, and this was finalized with questionnaires that the participants filled, okay? Then if I just highlight tutorial and testing for a little bit, again, here I'm talking about auditory processing, and I'm trying to infer using different metrics. And just because it is very difficult to directly infer auditory attention. So just by comparison, when we talk about visual attention, we can kind of do this by by measuring where the user is looking at the moment. We do this with eye trackers, but with audio information, this is not always possible. The person can be looking at you, but they can be thinking about something completely different and not be paying attention at all to what you're saying. So this is one important step here, especially when you talk about pre-processing the data and feature extraction to try to infer auditory attention, all right? Now, the study objectives for my paper were to evaluate the three different factors. First one was the nature of the stimuli, so I was comparing auditory and audiovisual stimuli. Again, this is an auditory task, so that's why I kept audio in both components here, so there's always an audio item. I also compared the ISI, which is the interval between the target and the competing stimuli. So again, we have an auditory attention task, and we're gonna have the target information, which is what the user needs to pay attention to, and also competing stimuli to distract the user. And the last one was gender. Here I just have one image of a participant in the task. So what we had was a very simple setup. We used a HC Pro Vive, and they were just in a room. This room was acoustically isolated just to avoid hearing any other distractor or any other sound that doesn't belong to the actual experiment. Also, this here is the virtual environment that I had. So the speaker is always located at the front of the user. So the user will be located where this blue notebook is. It's in the middle of the room. The auditory information, the target, will always be coming from the speaker, and the speaker will be telling a story. This task was divided in two. In the first one, they need to identify distractors, so they will be listening to the story, and whenever they hear a distractor or something that doesn't belong to the story, they would press the controller button. And there's also another task, which is the identification of keywords, where they would be listening to the story, and whenever they hear a keyword on the story, they would press the button. For this study, I had 77 participants split into 3 groups based on the interval between the target and the competing stimuli, which is the ISI. So I had the first group with the distractors placed before the keyword, a second group where they were at the same time as the keyword, and another one where they were after the keyword. To talk about the results, I have this graph here. In the x-axis, I had the interstimulus interval, which again is the interval between the distractor and the target information. Then I have the reaction time on the y-axis, and here I have information for the 2 tasks. The first one with the dotted lines for the distractors, and the second one with the solid lines for the keywords task. In the distractor tasks, we have that the mean reaction time, they varied with the nature of the stimuli. So if we take a look at, let me just get the laser pointer. So if we take a look at those two lines here, this is the distractor tasks. So we can see that the mean reaction time varied for auditory, which is here in blue, and audiovisual, which is here in red. And when we talk about the keywords task, we see that the mean reaction time didn't vary. So we're taking a look at these line here. So I can see that it was pretty much the same reaction time for all of the groups. The only difference that we see here is that for the keywords test, the mean reaction time will vary with the ISI. So see that for distractors presented before the keyword, then they had the highest reaction time. When it was at the same time is what at an average level. And then the best response time was when the distractor was placed after the keyword. So this means that participants were able to, for this last interval here, they were able to process the information, and then they could completely ignore the distractor because it was presented at a later stage, okay? The other data that I can talk about today will be the dwell times. So this is more obvious here, so we can have even the same pattern for both tasks. So on the left, I have the distractors task. So this is the dwell times on the objects, which are essentially everything that's not the speaker in the virtual environment. And then I have on the other side the results for the keywords task. You can see that they're all close to each other. So here I have lower dwell times on the objects and distractors, and I had participants looking most of the time to the target, which is the speaker in the room. This was expected because participants, they were instructed to look at the speaker and pay attention to the speaker at all times, all right? In terms of the key findings, we can see that the nature of the distractor was only relevant in the distractors task, because in this task we were talking more about differences in perception of those two elements. So I had audiovisual distractors with a faster response than auditory distractors. And the ISI was only an important factor in the keyword tasks. So what we can tell here is that when it comes to the nature of the distractors in the keywords task, it doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is the time when you present this distractor. It doesn't matter if it's audiovisual or auditory. The distractor will be there. It will distract the user regardless of the nature of the stimuli. And then for this, we have future recommendations as well. So here I'm talking about different ways of measuring auditory retention. And again, there's no standard way of measuring auditory retention directly. So we always do indirect ways of measuring auditory retention. And for this, I think it could be, I could use in the future maybe different sensors, for example, EEG data, where I can have a better temporal resolution. And also maybe explore other characteristics of the sound, because in this study, I didn't explore like different durations of the time. I only tested different nature for the stimuli, audiovisual and auditory, and also different presentation times for the stimuli. And again, just to highlight the importance of those type of studies, especially in education and healthcare, where auditory attention and attention in general, especially for all of us here, is the most valuable resource. With this, I just want to thank the funding agencies for this work. I'm from TUS, but this work was also funded by IRC, the Transmixer Project, and Science Foundation Ireland. And any questions? That's all.
I think I'm a bit confused. Can you go back to the results slide with the response time? Yeah. So 175 milliseconds is very, very fast. I mean, to me, it seems like it's like on the bounds of like human reaction times. Like, is there something I'm not understanding in relation to like, how you got the mean result to be 175? That seems very, very high to me. Like, very, very quick.
It is really fast, and it's a great question, because in the future, one of my objectives in the future is to test this with participants that have any hearing disabilities. So my initial study was on healthy participants. I think I forgot to mention this as well. So for healthy participants, this was my result. But let's say you have people with hearing disabilities, and they will be users of VR applications as well. So then you can have a different behavior, and then they can have different response times, and this can affect their attention in VR as well. So in the future, I actually want to do the same experiment, but with people with disabilities, and then see if there's any change. Because then if you have like 1 second or 2 seconds delay, this can represent a lot. Or maybe any mismatch.
Other questions? So I have a high-level question then for you, which is, so I read through most of the paper and I listened to you, but I'm still not quite sure, is your longer-term goal, is this aimed at mitigating distractions in some way, or is it just trying to understand humans' perceptual and cognitive abilities with respect to distractors, or something else?
Yeah, it is originally about understanding the perception of the stimuli from the user. And then, again, as I said earlier on, I want to apply this maybe to a healthcare application with people with hearing disabilities and see if they have the same behavior, or maybe use this as a foundation for a training application where they can enhance and improve their listening abilities.
That makes sense. Okay, good. Thank you. Any other questions? Well, then let's thank her and we'll go to our break.